Suppose you're a small shopkeeper in Rome in 1935. You sell cloth, soap, maybe a little olive oil on the side. You're not rich, but you're doing okay. Your biggest daily problems are customers who haggle too hard and cousins who forget to pay their tab. Life is manageable. Then, one day, the radio announces that Italy has invaded Ethiopia. There are speeches, flags, parades. Your kids come home from school waving little banners. The newspapers call it a glorious imperial mission. You mostly think that sounds expensive, but nobody asked you. A few weeks later, you start hearing a new word on the radio: sanctions. The League of Nations, basically the grandparent of today's UN, has decided that Italy needs to be punished for invading another country. So they announce economic sanctions. No more loans, restrictions on exports, certain raw materials cut off. The idea is noble. Use money, not bombs, to change behavior. At first you figure, okay, this will hurt the government, the army, the big guys, my little shop. I'll be fine. Yeah, about that. Slowly, little things start going missing. A shipment of imported fabric is delayed. Prices nudge higher. Supplier says, we can't get that anymore, but I can maybe find some through other channels. You don't like how he says other channels? You like his prices even less. Mussolini comes on the radio and announces that Italy will become self-sufficient, a fortress economy. He demands that Italians plant gardens, will save every scrap of metal, and tighten their belts for the glory of the nation. You notice he does not mention tightening his own belt. As the sanctions bite, the government steps in more and more. It starts controlling prices. It manages imports, tells people what they can and can't buy. Officially, this is all about strength and resilience. Unofficially, it's about trying to run a modern war in a modern state while being cut off from a lot of the outside world. You look around and realize something strange. The sanctions that were supposed to weaken the regime are also giving it an excuse. To grab more control over the economy and rally public opinion. If business is bad, it's the foreigner's fault. If prices are high, it's the League of Nations. If you complain, you're not just unhappy, you're unpatriotic. Meanwhile, the really important stuff, oil, coal, and a few key materials, never quite get fully cut off. Some countries stay neutral. Some quietly keep selling. Some look the other way when shipments get rerouted. So the war keeps going, the regime survives, and your life gets more controlled, more constrained, and more weird. That little Italian shopkeeper in 1935 had no idea, but he was living through an early version of a pattern we are still watching today. What happens when outside powers try to use economic sanctions as a weapon? And the target state responds by building a kind of economic bunker, a fortress economy. And that brings us to the present question rattling around in a lot of heads. How on earth is Russia still functioning? If you watched Western media in early 2022, the expectation was pretty clear. Sanctions were branded as economic Armageddon, the mother of all sanctions, sanctions from hell. The story was, cut Russia off from global finance, from tech, from trade, from Western brands. And the economy would crack. The ruble would collapse. The war machine would seize up. Fast forward, and that's not quite what you see. You see grocery stores in Moscow that are still stocked. You see GDP numbers that look annoyingly non-collapsed. You see new brands replacing old ones. And you see videos with titles like, How Russia Survived 16,000 Sanctions Genius Strategy, popping up in your YouTube recommendations, daring you to click. So what happened? Did sanctions fail? Is Russia secretly an economic superhero? Is everyone lying? Or is something more subtle going on, a fortress economy transition that looks stable on the surface, but comes with long-term costs buried underneath? To answer that, stay with our little Italian shopkeeper a bit longer, because his world is the emotional backbone of this story. Back in 1935, the League of Nations decided to punish Mussolini's Italy for invading Ethiopia. On paper, this was going to be a big deal. Coordinated sanctions by dozens of countries against what was, at that time, a major industrial power. Loans were restricted. Some exports to Italy were banned. The idea was to squeeze the economy until Mussolini backed down. Nice theory. Human behavior, as usual, had other plans. Italy had been flirting with economic self-sufficiency for years. Mussolini loved the idea of autarky, Italy producing as much as it could for itself. In practice, the country still relied heavily on imported raw materials, especially oil and coal. The sanctions, however, didn't fully shut those off. They hit a lot of things, but the truly critical energy exports were left in a gray zone, debated, delayed, and watered down. Why? Because the countries imposing sanctions had their own interests. Cutting off Italian oil and coal would hurt Italian civilians, yes, but it would also hurt British and French companies, shipping firms, and broader trade. Leaders in London and Paris wanted to look tough without paying too high a price. So they aimed for sanctions that were symbolically powerful but practically limited. Inside Italy, Mussolini took this and ran with it. He used the sanctions as propaganda gold. "The world is against us," he said more or less. "They want to starve us. We must stand together. We must tighten our belts. We must obey." Suddenly, any economic hardship was not the result of his choices, but the cruelty of foreign enemies. The Italian state ramped up controls over prices, over trade, over imports and exports. Black markets flourished. People smuggled goods across borders, parallel channels of trade appeared, often at higher prices and lower quality. Your cousin who used to sell cigarettes suddenly became an expert in alternative sourcing. Sound familiar yet? By the time the League finally lifted sanctions in 1936, they had not stopped the war, had not toppled Mussolini, and had not prevented Italy from conquering Ethiopia. What they had done was help Mussolini consolidate more control inside Italy, deepen his alliance with Germany, and push the country further into a fortress-like economic posture, more controlled, more propagandized, more insulated, but also more brittle under the surface. So what's the lesson here? Not sanctions never work. They sometimes do. The lesson is that when you hit a determined regime with big sanctions, you often don't get a clean on-off effect where the economy just dies. You get adaptation. You get workarounds. You get a new, distorted version of the economy that survives by doing weird things. Now, fast forward to right now. You have probably seen at least one headline about Russia's shadow fleet of oil tankers, old ships with murky ownership, turning off their GPS trackers, doing ship-to-ship transfers, and delivering Russian crude to countries that are very creatively interpreting. The phrase "we support sanctions," at the same time, you have gray market iPhones and other Western gadgets still showing up in Russian stores, even though the official brands supposedly left. A BBC investigation followed traders hauling iPhones through Kazakhstan and other friendly countries' parallel imports, where goods are shipped around official channels so that on paper, nothing is going to Russia. And in real life, the latest Apple gear is on a shelf in Moscow with a slightly higher price tag and a slightly shadier supply chain. Similar reporting has shown how parallel imports and gray routes are used for car parts, electronics, and all the little components that keep a modern industrial economy alive. So when you ask, how is the Russian economy still standing after all those sanctions? The short version is, it's standing on a maze of workarounds, ghost ships for oil, gray market consumer goods, and a war economy that is burning the future to pay for the present. Now let us zoom out and put a name on the bigger pattern, the fortress economy transition. In simple language, a fortress economy is what you get when a state under heavy external pressure starts rebuilding its economic system for survival under siege, instead of growth and peace. It stops behaving like a normal, open, efficiency-seeking economy and starts behaving like a bunker with a GDP. The cycle tends to unfold in stages. Early on, the country is plugged into global trade. It sells what it's good at, like oil, gas, metals, or cheap manufacturing, and buys what it isn't good at, advanced tech, luxury goods, high-end machinery, financial services. It's not independent, but it's functional, might even be thriving. Then a political or military conflict hits, and the outside world, or at least a big chunk of it, decides to use economic sanctions as a weapon. Banks get cut off from SWIFT. Central bank assets get frozen. Export bans and import bans kick in. Companies pull out, some because they have to, some because they don't want to explain to their customers why they're still there. At this point, the target state faces a choice: fold, negotiate, or adapt. Most regimes that think they can survive choose adaptation. They slam on capital controls to keep money from fleeing. They reroute exports through friendly or neutral countries. They legalize gray market imports. They lean hard on state spending, especially military spending, to keep employment and factories running. They stop caring as much about long-term efficiency and start caring a lot about short-term survival and political control. Over time, this transition creates a fortress economy, more closed, more centrally managed, more reliant on black and gray. Markets more focused on war or security industries, and less interested in being a normal competitive player in the global system. Historically, fortress economies tend to look surprisingly okay on the surface for a while. They can show growth numbers. They can keep shelves stocked, especially if they still have something valuable to sell like oil and gas. They can even maintain a sense of stability for ordinary people, at least in the near term. But underneath, they are usually paying a price: underinvestment in civilian sectors, brain drain, decaying infrastructure, rising corruption, and a slow erosion of future potential. It's like paying the mortgage by skipping all your home maintenance. The house doesn't collapse tomorrow. It just gets quietly worse. Now, how does that connect back to Russia? After the 2022 invasion of Ukraine, Russia was hit with what are often described as the harshest sanctions regime ever placed on a major economy. Thousands of individual and sectoral sanctions, frozen central bank reserves, export controls on high-tech components, financial isolation measures, and a long list of Western companies exiting the market. If the goal was a sudden, dramatic economic collapse, lights out, grocery shelves empty, currency worthless, that did not happen. Instead, something much more in line with the fortress economy pattern seems to have emerged. Russia still sells enormous volumes of oil and gas, but the routes have changed. Where it used to send energy easily to Europe, it now sells more to China, India, and other buyers at a discount. To get around price caps and shipping restrictions, it often uses that shadow fleet of older tankers with opaque ownership. These ships sometimes turn off tracking, do ship-to-ship transfers, and generally behave like a maritime version of "don't worry about it, it's handled." On the import side, you have those legalized parallel imports. The Russian government essentially said, if official channels are closed, we'll just bless the unofficial ones. So instead of Apple shipping iPhones directly to Russia, you get them going to Kazakhstan, Turkey, the Caucasus, and then being re-exported or smuggled in. Retailers advertise the latest gear, they just don't talk too much about how it arrived. That helps maintain a sense of normal life. You can still buy a smartphone. You can still get a washing machine. Yes, it might be more expensive or slightly less reliable, but it exists. And psychologically, that matters a lot. A fortress economy that can keep them all lights on looks stable, even when the underlying plumbing is full of duct tape. Meanwhile, the Russian state has leaned hard into a war economy. Defense spending has soared. Factories are retooled to produce shells, drones, and armored vehicles. People who might have been making cars or appliances are making military equipment instead. That boosts certain industries in certain regions. It props up employment. It even contributes to measured GDP growth. Because building things that explode still counts as economic output, even if they don't make anyone's life better in the long run. None of this means Russia is fine. It means Russia is adapting in the same broad way that other sanctioned, ambitious states have adapted in the past. By moving from an open, trade-oriented model to a more closed fortress-style model. So what looks similar between 1935 Italy and today's Russia? In both cases, sanctions were used as a tool to change behavior and punish aggression. In both cases, the target regime used those sanctions as propaganda to rally the public, blame outsiders, and justify tighter state control over the economy. In both cases, workarounds quickly emerged: alternative suppliers, smuggling routes, gray markets, friendly or neutral third countries acting as middlemen. In both cases, the outside world hoped that economic pain would produce rapid political change. In reality, it mostly produced adaptation and a harder, more insulated regime. But there are big differences too. Italy in the 1930s was not an energy superpower. Russia today is. Energy exports give Russia a huge lever. Even when facing sanctions, there is always some buyer somewhere who wants discounted oil or gas. The modern financial system is vastly more complex than it was in 1935. There are more channels, more instruments, more shadow banks, more shell companies, more ways to hide or reroute flows. The same goes for trade logistics. You can do things with shipping, insurance, and corporate structures today that a 1930s customs officer could not even imagine. Information is also different. Italians in 1935 mostly got one narrative: the states. Russians today see state TV, but also YouTube, Telegram, TikTok, and foreign news and until it gets blocked. People have more ways to understand what's happening, but also more noise to get lost in. And the scale is different. Sanctioning a medium-sized 1930s Italy is not the same as sanctioning a G20 energy exporter deeply wired into global commodity markets. So no, this is not a one-to-one copy of the League of Nations versus Mussolini, but it rhymes. It follows the same rough fortress economy arc: pressure, adaptation, more control, weird workarounds, and a trade-off between present stability and future strength. Now, we get to the important part: what this understanding changes about how you think. First, it should lower the temperature on the sanctions either work 100% or fail 100% argument. Historically, sanctions against large resource-rich countries tend to produce partial effects, messy adaptations, and political narratives on both sides. They rarely deliver the cinematic and then everything collapsed moment that pundits promise. Second, it should make you skeptical of very simple explanations. When someone says Russia is totally fine, sanctions did nothing that misses the long-term costs and distortions that fortress economies usually suffer. When someone else says Russia is about to collapse any minute now, that misses the short-term resilience that comes from having resources, state control, and a population used to hardship. Third, it gives you a lens for those ghost ships and gray market iPhones. Instead of seeing them as random curiosities, you can see them as the visible edge of a broader adaptation pattern. The fortress economy doesn't mean no trade. It means trade that runs through stranger routes under stranger rules with stranger middlemen. Fourth, it helps you avoid one very American habit: assuming that any event you don't like is proof that the system is broken or nothing works. Sanctions not producing instant collapse doesn't mean they failed in every sense. It means they're one tool among many, operating inside a complex system where other actors also have agency, creativity, and their own incentives. People over 40, especially in the US, have lived through a lot of this. Will definitely happen. Claims that didn't pan out. The Soviet collapse would bring endless peace. China would definitely liberalize, the euro would fall apart. Globalization would never reverse. Take your pick. By now, you've earned the right to be allergic to overconfident narratives. Understanding the fortress economy cycle means replacing "why didn't Russia collapse?" like they said, with a better question: what kind of economy tends to emerge when you combine heavy sanctions, resource wealth, state control, and global demand for your exports? You don't need to love or hate the answer. You just need to understand that it's not magic. It's a pattern. It also nudges how you think about time. Fortress economies often look okay in the near term by sacrificing the future. They burn through reserves. They put off maintenance. They prioritize tanks over tech startups. From the outside, you see stable prices and stocked stores and you think, I guess it's working. From the inside, the bill is quietly growing. That doesn't mean it will all fall apart on exactly this date. It just means that history is full of countries that looked strangely fine right up until they weren't. The lag between cause and visible effect can be long enough that most people who made the early decisions are retired by the time the bill arrives. And finally, it reminds you that nobody, including you and including this channel, gets a perfect real-time scoreboard of how well sanctions are working. All anyone has are partial data points, political spin, and historical analogies. The best use of those analogies is not to make bold predictions, but to build a calmer, more realistic sense of what's possible. So when you see another headline about Russia's GDP surprising to the upside, or another piece about ghost ships in the Atlantic, or another chart of smartphone imports through Kazakhstan, you don't have to rush to a conclusion. You can store it in the Fortress Economy folder in your brain and think, okay, that fits the pattern. See how the next chapter looks. That's the spirit of this channel. History isn't here to give you cheat codes. It's here to help you see that today's weirdness usually has a family resemblance to yesterday's weirdness. Once you see the pattern, you don't have to panic every time a new headline drops. You can watch, think, and stay grounded. If you like that approach, laughing a little, rolling your eyes a little, not actually understanding what What's going on without needing a bunker? And 400 cans of beans? This is what we do on Chill Financial Rewind. Hit subscribe if you enjoy having your blood pressure lowered by context instead of raised by clickbait. Think of it as your regular dose of, oh, that's why in a world that keeps yelling breaking at you every 5 minutes.